Audiobook Academy. Book Summary. Rip Van Winkle. By Washington Irving. Washington Irving's short novella Rip Van Winkle was published in 1819 and is a favorite of many. Geoffrey Crayon's sketchbook, Gent, was the original publication of the story. During Irving's time in Birmingham, England, he wrote this narrative. There have been numerous adaptations of the narrative, including plays, operettas, concerts, poems and comic books and cartoons, as well as TV productions and web series like Claymation. One of Rip Van Winkle's stories is that of an elderly man who lives in a little village near the Catskill Mountain in New York. By hunting with his dog all day in the mountains, Rip avoids his wife, who is always pestering him. At some point in the future, Rip finds himself on a journey that takes him further up the mountain than at any time in his life, and when the two of them make their way back down the mountain, they come across each other. To get the kick to a gathering of other little men playing ninepin, the man calls to Rip and Rip obliges by helping him carry it up the mountain. Rip begins to relax and sip some of the beer from the keg despite the men's skepticism. Soon, Rip begins to feel pretty inebriated and falls asleep. He finds that the men have vanished when he wakes up. Rip descends the mountain to return to his town and learns that rather than sleeping on the mountain overnight as he believed, he has actually been asleep for 20 years. Everything he knew about the town has vanished, and he also lost his beloved wife. During his slumber, the Revolutionary War erupted, and Rip was forced to adapt to a new world as a free American citizen. Eventually, Rip is reunited with his daughter and goes to live in her house with her. While sitting outside the local inn, he joyfully tells his tale to anybody who will listen. Postscript informs the reader that this narrative was discovered among the writings of the late Diedrich Knickerbocker, an elderly New Yorker, who was fascinated by the Dutch history and manner of the descendants of its ancient settlers. Knickerbocker completed the province's history under the Dutch governors and is now the undisputed authority on the subject. Now that Knickerbocker is dead, it may not be regrettable to suggest that he may have spent his time doing something more important than writing books. Regardless of how Knickerbocker is remembered by his detractors, his name is still spoken highly of among excellent people whose good opinion is well worth having, and even today, the biscuit makers in New York have his visage embossed on their New Year cakes. There's a lot of backstory in the Catskill Mountains, where the town women rely on them to foretell the weather. A cloak of gray vapor surrounds the mountains when conditions are good, but when the going gets tougher, the mountains don their blue and purple garb. Located at the base of these mountains is a small town that was established before the United States won the Revolutionary War. In 1664, Peter Stuyvesant, the final Director General of the colony of New Netherland, established the settlement. The original settlers' little yellow dwellings may still be seen throughout the village. A man by the name of Rip Van Winkle resides in one of these modest dwellings. A descendant of the illustrious Van Winkle family, Rip has lived in the mansion for many years and accompanied Peter Stuyvesant during the assault of Fort Christina. Van Winkle, on the other hand, is a pleasant, amiable man who inherited little of his forebears' warlike temperament. Van Winkle is married with 2 children and is bullied by his wife. Van Winkle is, on the other hand, a beloved local hero, and the town's children squeal with delight whenever they see him. In his spare time, Van Winkle likes to spend time with the children in his neighborhood and teaches them how to fly kites, shoot marbles, and tell long ghost stories. In reality, Van Winkle's primary issue is a lack of motivation to engage in any productive job. No matter how much time he puts in doing odd tasks and helping his neighbors out, it seems like Van Winkle will never be able to manage his family and farm properly. Van Winkle has given up on his own farm because he believes it is the most difficult piece of property in the country to care for, and because so many things went wrong there, from his cow wandering off to weeds growing faster than anywhere else. While Van Winkle's ancestors had left him more land, his maintained land dwindled down to a single plot of maize and potatoes. Children of Van Winkle are as tattered as his farm, and Rip, his eldest son, carries on the family tradition of not liking to work and wearing shabby clothing. As a result, Van Winkle is content. One of those lucky humans, of silly, well-oiled dispositions, who take the world easily, eat white bread or brown, whatever can be obtained with the least thought or difficulty, and would rather hunger on a penny than work for a pound, he is referred to. His wife, on the other hand, is always berating him for his slack work ethic. When she does, Rip simply shrugs and walks away. Wolf, Rip's dog, is his lone ally at home, and he is brave, despite his terror of Dame Van Winkle. Dame Van Winkle only grows more enraged as the years go by, and Van Winkle himself begins attending philosophical gatherings on a bench outside a tiny inn. He sits with other men and narrates tales about the people and the place for hours on end. It isn't until one of them picks up a newspaper and starts chatting about current events that the conversation really picks up. The village school teacher, Derek Van Bummel, is also a member of the club. Not to be daunted by a large word in the dictionary describes Van Bummel, a well-educated man. Nicholas Vedder, the community patriarch and innkeeper, is another club member. In spite of the fact that he rarely communicates, Vedder remains on the bench all day long, smoking his pipe. In the course of a typical day, the guys sit around doing nothing until Dame Van Winkle arrives and chastises them for wasting their time. Finally, Van Winkle becomes reluctant, even if only for a short while, to go hunting with the guys. During his journey into the woods, Van Winkle sits at the base of an ancient tree with Wolf and commiserates. The Cotswolds' highest point was unintentionally reached by he and Wolf on a beautiful autumn day. Van Winkle, weary from his trek, takes a seat on a grassy hill overlooking town. His thoughts turn to his recent argument with his wife while he takes in the scenery for a while. Van Winkle hears someone shouting his name out of nowhere. Wolf is terrified when he hears the call and clings to his master's side in terror. When Van Winkle sees a weird hunched figure approaching in the distance, he rushes down to help them with the heavy cargo they are carrying on their back, thinking it is someone from the hamlet. At first, it is hard for him to tell who the man is, but as he draws closer, it becomes clearer to him. The individual in question is small and square-built old man with bushy long hair and an enormous grizzly mustache. His outfit was inspired by an era of Dutch fashion from the 1600s as a matter of fact. In addition, he carries a large keg on his back that appears to be full of booze. When the man sees Van Winkle approaching, he gives the signal for him to assist him with his load. Van Winkle rushes down to him out of kindness. When Van Winkle escorts him to an amphitheater-like hollow, the man appears to be in a state of trance. Ninepins is being played inside the amphitheater by a strange gathering of folks. In addition to their outlandish clothing and abnormally huge heads and faces, the inhabitants of this world have small, piggish eyes. They're all sporting variously shaped and colored beards. He was a robust elderly guy, with a weather-beaten countenance. He wore a lace doublet, broad belt and hanger, high-crowned hat and feather, scarlet stockings, and high-heeled shoes with roses in them, reads the description of one of the unusual men. Van Winkle is reminded of an old Flemish painting he saw in the parlor of one of the town residents. The men's grim, severe features as they play and the hush that engulfs them are even more strange. Men immediately turn and gaze as Van Winkle and his friend approach, making Van Winkle nervous. Despite this, his partner goes to empty the keg into huge flagons, which he does not understand. In silence, the men begin to sip their booze and return to their games. As Van Winkle continues to observe them, he becomes less awed and more relaxed. That's when he begins to drink the beer he helped to carry, and quickly falls asleep as a result of his intoxication. In the morning, he wakes up on the green knoll where he first saw the little man. After drinking a flagon of liquor, Van Winkle discovers it's morning and he must have slept there all night. Van Winkle worries about what he will tell his wife and begins to pack his belongings for his return home. His gun is nowhere to be found. Instead, he discovers an antique firelock in its place. The lock has broken off, the barrel is rusty, and the stock has been devoured by worms. Van Winkle fears that the party's small men have robbed him of his rifle by playing a prank on him. Wolf is also missing, but Van Winkle feels that he may have wandered off on his own. In order to get his dog and pistol back, Van Winkle returns to the scene of the party. When he gets up to walk, he notices that his joints are unusually stiff, but he just chalks it up to sleeping on the ground. At first Van Winkle doesn't believe his eyes. The dry stream bed from the night before has been replaced with a fast-flowing, bubbling stream. He continues to scramble along it despite the obstruction, pushing through the vegetation that has grown over it. In the amphitheater, he returns and can't find the entrance. There is now only a large rock with a waterfall dangling from the top of it in its stead. Van Winkle, confused and disoriented, knows that he is hungry and must return to town to get some food. To avoid starving in the mountains, he is unwilling to give up both his dog and his pistol. As Van Winkle makes his way back to the village, he is startled to encounter a number of people he doesn't recognize. The individuals around him are also dressed in a way that he is unfamiliar with, and they all look at him strangely as if he is the only one out of place. Astonishingly, Van Winkle's beard appears to have grown a foot in a matter of hours, prompting the individuals around him to do the same. The moment Van Winkle enters the settlement, he is greeted by a swarm of odd youngsters who giggle and point at his gray beard. When he arrives in the village, he's struck by how different it's become. It has grown in size and population. All of his usual landmarks have vanished in a matter of hours, and rows of dwellings have sprung up in their place. Is Van Winkle about to lose his mind? He's not sure if the hamlet or he's the one who's been possessed. Reconnecting with natural sights like the Catskill Mountains and Hudson River helps him verify that he is in fact in his hometown. If the flagon of beer is to blame, Van Winkle wanders. On his way home, he expects to hear his wife's yelling. Instead, he finds the house in ruins, with the roof caved in, the windows shattered, and the walls covered in mold. Inside, a dog that resembles Wolf is waiting for him. Van Winkle calls the dog by name, but he is malnourished and in poor health when he receives a response. Snarling at the enemy, he shows off his teeth. Van Winkle laments that even his own dog has forgotten him, believing that the dog is still Wolf. The inside of the mansion is a ghost town. When Van Winkle tries to summon his family, they remain silent. He dashes from the house to the village inn, where he used to hang out, only to discover that it has vanished as well. The Union Hotel by Jonathan Doolittle stands in its place. There is now a flagpole in place of the original tree that stood in front of the inn. The flag atop the pole is unfamiliar to Van Winkle, although it features a smattering of stars and stripes. A portrait of a man named Washington now hangs outside the inn instead of a portrait of King George. People congregate outside the inn, and Van Winkle notices that their demeanor has altered. As a result, they have a more active tone than the one he's used to. Nicholas Vedder, who he always expects to be seated outside the inn, and Van Bummel are both nowhere to be found. Instead, he meets an unhealthy-looking man. Handbills are being handed out, and the man is yelling at Van Winkle about the right to vote and other things that Van Winkle considers to be a waste of time. Van Winkle's unkempt look and the youngsters he is surrounded by quickly pique the interest of the inn's politicians. "On which side did he vote?" asked the man passing out handbills to Van Winkle. Rather than respond, Van Winkle simply stares at him. To his surprise, a second man approaches from the side and grabs hold of him by the elbow. Neither Van Winkle nor the narrator seem to know the answer. He forces his way through the mob and marches up to Van Winkle with a knowing, self-important old gentleman in a sharp cocked hat. Why would Van Winkle show up to an election with a rifle on his back and a crowd following him? The man asks with his eyes piercingly penetrating. If Van Winkle is planning on rioting, the man wants to know. As a way to alleviate the issue, Van Winkle says he is a calm and faithful king's servant. People are in a tizzy about this. They start yelling that he's a spy and a Tory, and they demand that he be hauled away. The self-important man in the cocked hat regains control of the throng once more, but it's a struggle. A second time, he presses Van Winkle about his purpose and the identity of his pursuers. That he is looking for some of his old friends who used to gather at the inn and assures him that he is not a threat. The conceited individual wants to know who his ideal neighbors are, so he gives him a list. When Van Winkle calls out for Nicholas Vedder, the room falls silent. Nicholas Vedder has been dead for 18 years, a stranger tells him. However, the wooden tombstone in the churchyard has since decayed and fallen apart, according to his story. In response to Van Winkle's request for a neighbor, Bram Dutcher, who vanished at the start of the war, he is told he was slain at the storming of Stony Point. Or perhaps he was swept away by a tidal wave at the base of Antony's Nose and died. Any way you look at it, he never returned from the war. Van Winkle inquires about Van Bummel, and is informed that he, too, enlisted in the militia, rose to the rank of general, and is now serving in the House of Representatives. Everything in the town that Van Winkle remembers seems to be gone, and he is bewildered by how long it has been since he last visited. He wonders himself if anyone in the audience has heard of Rip Van Winkle, as he hasn't been able to locate any more buddies. Rip Van Winkle, they say, is sitting against a tree across the plaza, awaiting his discovery. On his way back down the mountain, Rip sees a man who looks exactly like him when he originally set out on his journey. As a result, he feels disoriented and begins to question his own self-identity. Asked by the onlookers for clarification, he admits his inability to identify himself and that he doesn't appear to be himself. Exclaimed him, "God knows, I'm not myself, I am someone else, there is me there, but no. That is someone else who has taken my place. I don't know what to do. On the mountainside, I fell asleep last night and woke up with a new gun, a new name, and a new identity, all of which I have no idea how to identify." Upon hearing this exclamation, onlookers presume the elderly guy is insane and decide to treat him with kindness while keeping his gun secure to prevent him from harming anyone. Assuming that Van Winkle is merely a lunatic old man, the cocked-hatted man returns to the inn. The crowd thins out as a stunning woman carries a young infant in her arms through the thick of it. Little Rip starts crying as he sees an old guy and a lady comforting him and naming him Rip. Having a sense of recognition, Van Winkle proceeds to inquire as to the identity of the woman in question. She claims to be Judith Gardenier, she claims. In response to his inquiry, she reveals that her father's name was Rip Van Winkle, but that he had vanished into the mountains 20 years prior and that his dog had returned home without him. Judith claims she has no idea whether or not her father committed suicide or was abducted by Native Americans. He asks her in a weak voice, "Where is your mother?" A few minutes ago, she tells him that Dame Van Winkle, who had been shouting at a street vendor, had also died after shattering her blood vessel. In the end, Van Winkle grabs Judith by the arms and informs her that he is her father, claiming to be her biological father. Rip Van Winkle, once a young man, is now an old man thanks to his father's words. "I am your father," he exclaimed. Rip Van Winkle's name is utterly unknown to the general public. The audience is hushed once more until an elderly woman emerges and places her hands on Van Winkle's chin. Peering at him, she says, "Rip Van Winkle." She extends a warm greeting and inquires as to his whereabouts. Tells them about the small men and their flagon, and claims that the 20 years he's been missing had been like one night to him. As the throng continues to doubt him, they turn to Peter Vanderdonk, an old friend of the family, for an opinion. Peter Vanderdonk is just arriving at the scene. When it comes to local legends, Peter, the village's oldest resident, has a wealth of knowledge thanks to his ancestry as a descendant of the historian of the same name who penned one of the province's first records. As soon as Peter sees Van Winkle, he declares to the assembled audience that he is speaking the truth about the story's little guys. His ancestors have taught him that the Catskill Mountains are home to unusual creatures, and he believes this to be true. "My father had once seen them in their old Dutch clothes playing ninepins," he claims, referring to Henrik Hudson, the famed river and land discoverer. Moreover, Henrik claimed to have once overheard the game's balls rumbling like thunder across the mountains. After that, the audience accepts Van Winkle as truth and disperses to focus on the election's more pressing issues. Van Winkle's daughter takes him in to live with her in her modest but comfortable apartment. Van Winkle learns that her husband is one of the neighborhood kids who used to follow him around. Rip, Van Winkle's son, was hired to work on his brother and farm laws, but like his father, he was prone to laziness and a resemblance to his father. Van Winkle has resumed his walks and other activities that he used to enjoy. Many of his old pals are still living in the village, albeit they are much older than he was when he first arrived there. Van Winkle is back to making friends with the local kids and assisting them in their recreation activities. When he had nothing else to do at home, he returned to the bench outside the inn and was hailed as one of the village's patriarchs and a chronicler of the old days before the war because of his age. When Van Winkle awoke from his slumber, he was delighted to hear that the Revolutionary War had taken place while he was sleeping. He also enjoys the fact that he no longer has to rely on his wife's approval when he does what he wants. In front of the inn, he sits on a bench and relates his story to everybody who comes by. Some of the facts of the story he tells seem to alter, but this can be excused as a peculiarity of a man who has just lately awakened. The narrator claims that the story he has told is an accurate, settled-down version of the tale, and that everyone in the hamlet has it memorized. Many people in the area are skeptical of its veracity, but the locals who are descended from the Old Dutch believe it to be real. Some henpecked husbands in the village still long for a comsip from Rip Van Winkle's flagon, as they can still hear the clink of ninepin balls. Rip Van Winkle, the title character and protagonist of the story. In the years leading up to the Revolutionary War, Van Winkle, a common compassionate guy, lives in a village at the foot of the Catskill Mountains. A good neighbor, Van Winkle is always willing to provide a hand to the neighborhood kids in their games and to their parents in their domestic tasks. The problem is that at home he is more of a couch potato who has no interest in working on his own farm or doing any of his own housekeeping tasks. Van Winkle has a reputation for being a henpecked man. Everyone in town is aware of his wife's proclivity for nagging and pursuing him wherever he goes in order to bring him back to the house. He retreats to the mountains in search of solitude, when he runs into a group of gnomes drinking beer and playing ninepin. Van Winkle wakes up in town after a 20-year hiatus to discover it has changed dramatically. Finally, he's content to retire and spend time with her, as well as with his grown-up daughter. Van Winkle may have always desired to lead this kind of life. Dame Van Winkle, Rip's wife. In the story, Dame Van Winkle is shown as a cruel, domineering figure who spends her days hounding Rip into doing his chores and hauling him home from wherever he goes. After Rip's sleep, Dame Van Winkle is undoubtedly the story's principal enemy, even though she vanishes from the narrative. In the end, she breaks a blood vessel while yelling at a street seller and dies. Nicholas Vedder, an old man and father of Van Winkle's village who is the landlord of the inn outside which many of the men in town gather to gossip and tell stories. Despite the fact that he rarely speaks, Vedder is revered and seen as a leader in his group. By keeping track of how hard he puffs on his pipe, the other men have established a way to evaluate his feelings. During the day, Vedder sits outside the inn on a bench, only moving when the sun gets too bright. A native of the United States, Washington Irving was the first American author to gain international acclaim for his work. Ichabod Crane and Rip Van Winkle were two of his fictional creations. On April 30, 1738, in New York City, Irving was born. As a result of his education, he became a practicing lawyer. Then he worked in a number of law firms after graduating. For health reasons, he went around Europe between 1804 and 1806, at which point he was finally admitted to practice law. However, he had only a passing interest in the practice of law. In the end, it didn't last long. Then he started writing and sending satirical essays and sketches to New York newspapers. Gents' Letters of Jonathan Oldstyle, a collection of these writings from 1802 to 1803, brought Irving his first statewide prominence as a writer. As well as his own brothers William, 1766 to 1821, and Peter, 1771 to 1838, and his brother-in-law James Kirk Paulding, he was a prominent member of the Irving family social circle from 1807 to 1808. Saligandy or The Wigwams and Opinions of Launcelot Langstaff, Esquire and others was written by them both together in partnership. New York society was the subject of a series of sarcastic articles and poetry. As a writer of essays and wit, Irving's contributions to this anthology helped establish his reputation. A History of New York, 1809, purportedly authored by Irving's famous comic creation, the Dutch-American scholar Diedrich Knickerbocker, further cemented Irving's notoriety. Irving moved to Liverpool, England in 1815 to work as a silent partner in his brother's commercial enterprise in order to get experience in the economic world. Irving returned to writing after a string of losses led to the demise of the business. In England, he wrote the sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, Gent, which included The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, one of his most well-known pieces. A staff member of the U.S. Mission in Madrid, Spain, from 1826 until 1829. He wrote a number of historical writings at this time. Irving returned to the United States in 1832, after a 17-year absence, and was greeted as a national hero. The year was 1846, and he bought Sunnyside, a country estate near Tarrytown in New York. He stayed there until his death in November of 1859, when he was 76 years old. In Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, he is buried. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.